Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. Today, I have Miss Rachel Tobias on the show. We discuss the World Economic Forum, the coming fascism that is being pushed on a global scale, and how you should look at this, and some things you should be aware of that are trying to be pushed down your throat. I think having her perspective as well is a great benefit, and she's done a lot of research and reading on this, as many of us have, and I think she gives a little bit of detail that maybe some of us have been missing. And so I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you are going to enjoy listening to it. But first, RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great anarcho-capitalist and libertarian. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And check out his book, Project Manicore. It's really good. Thank you, Mr. Tom Burton, for the music. Let's get to the show. Okay, I am here with Miss Rachel Tobias, one of my favorite people in the world. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it was great to see you. We had a blast at Childeberg, and I've always enjoyed your Twitter. It's one of my favorite Twitters.
Thank you.
So I asked you on, and I titled this ahead of time, so we have to stay on topic. It's World Economic Fascism. So you've probably been as aware of this and keeping track of it as much as I have, if not more so, or in a different way, I guess. And so I wanted to get you on, just like when I got Michael Rechtenwald on. I wanted to kind of bounce ideas off of each other, go through what we see happening, what the I can't speak, trajectory is, and just kind of have an all around like good conversation on it. So what are you looking at when you're looking at the World Economic Forum, their plans for quote unquote the Great Reset or shaping the future of the Industrial Revolution, however you want to say it? What are you looking at that has your haunches on end?
Yeah, so with the World Economic Forum, what I'd like to do is just break down one of their white papers and go over some of the notes to it. And for me personally, I'm interested in understanding the flavor of tyranny that they're going for, right? Because we live in an interesting time where there's all this virtue signaling, and there's definitely like a hobo code, if you will, to the language that they use. They use a lot of words like equity, equality, sustainability. So there's definitely a very specific type of fascism that they're going for, and a very specific way that they want to put out how what they're doing is so good and why we should buy into it. And the way I see it is, if we can understand that code and if we can break down their language, then we can try to anticipate, the avenues that they're going to take to want to control us. And I think that that's an important skill to have. So basically, the World Economic Forum itself, I have a little bit of the background on how it came to be with Charles Klaus or Klaus Schwab, sorry, as the founder of it. And again, I just want to break down this June 2021 white paper.
Did you just create a love child between the Koch brothers and Schwab? I think that's what you did.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people to keep. There's a lot of players to keep track of. But absolutely. Hey, look, with modern tech, I don't judge. You know, whatever these lizard creatures want to do, I respect that. But yeah, I just want to talk about a little bit of the history of it, and then one of their white papers, their Build Back Broader paper, and kind of just get into where things are headed. And I want this to be an episode that maybe people can give their friends or people who aren't really into researching this stuff can look at.
Well, let's start with the semantics of it, because one of my favorite essays ever is George Orwell wrote an essay called English Language. And he discusses how the utilization of language by politicians waters down language. And, you know, as a writer, Orwell was very, very, very into the way language is used, being very semantically and pedantically correct. And so he was very upset about the watering down of language, the fact that words were no longer accessing any meaning in reality. So when you're talking Build Back Broader versus Build Back Better, which is the term that all these politicians around the world are using, what is the differentiation between the two?
My interpretation of that is the Build Back Broader focuses on more of the global aspect of this and trying to forge that fake connectivity between everyone and the whole we're all in this together, versus when the politicians say Build Back Better, it makes it sound a little bit more local, like somehow every state is doing what they can for their citizens. That's the way that I look at this. Yeah. And I agree with you about words and the whole newspeak. I mean, we've seen, what the hell is social distancing? What the hell is that? You know, and it reminds justice? Me. Yeah. And then it reminds me of, I'm sure you're familiar with Terence McKenna, who is very into language and talking about like the description of human society being based upon language as this sort of, or this creative, like alive force. And right. It's such a bastardization of the way that things are now, where, you know, it's interesting the words that we use for certain things. I've been thinking quite about this. When we say the words "I'm awake," like it's such an interesting thing to think about. And why do people phrase things and use that? And why is it we use kind of the same words to describe some kind of esoteric thing? But yeah, when newspeak happens, it kind of hits you every time there's an article that says something kind of funky or contradictory, and it's so far removed from any truth. You know that they're trying to throw more propaganda at you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at this white paper, Build Back Broader, what are some of the things that stick out to you?
Well, there's quite a bit. The framing of it, so it kind of starts out with them creepily talking about how this COVID pandemic created such a situation that allows for the opportunity for us to kind of rearrange society. And what sticks out to me is the flowery language that they tend to use, where they're like, well, now is a chance for corporations to be socially responsible, and, you know, we can rise to all these challenges. And when I go through this, they'll say things like, the paper is intended to be a resource for governments, business, and other stakeholders interested in furthering economic social progress. And to me, I'm like, what the hell is a stakeholder, right? Like, right. What does that even mean? We get into just the background of the World Economic Forum. So this was started by Klaus Schwab in 1971. It's a non-governmental organization. And his idea, his whole concept of creating this forum is he envisioned a future where he said modern enterprise must serve not only shareholders, but also stakeholders to achieve long-term growth and prosperity. It kind of reminds me of colonialism. Basically, a bunch of people sitting around that own these huge corporations, have a lot of power and influence, and feel that they have the right to socially engineer society in this pathological, fake, altruistic direction. Right. It's the same way that government tries to convince us that we're all stakeholders in government and society. Like, oh, your vote is your share in this society. Right. But we don't actually get power that way. This is a bunch of people with... Mm-hmm.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's going to operate a lot of the same way too, because one of the things that they are laying out there is that your representative is who's going to attend the meetings. It's not going to be you attending these meetings.
Yeah.
You're not going to have any say over this. Your representative is who's going to have say over it. So it's like this corporate republic that they are trying to like shove down our throats. And one of the things I likened it to was how the CIA goes in and overthrows governments on behalf of corporations. So if you look at, Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, if you look at what happened in Iran in the 50s with the Anglo-Persian oil company, which now is BP, if you look at the way these things developed, this was all an evolutionary track that this is the corporate structure has been laid upon.
Yeah, it's important to know. It sounds obvious, but we're not dealing with organic shifts in the market. We're dealing with planned out generational trajectories, and we're along for the ride. I'm not saying we don't have any power. I'm just saying we have to know where things are at and how bad they are to have any kind of power in it. So on page 5 of this, they say national economies will need nothing short of a new social contract with redesigned systems to ensure equality of opportunity, distributional justice, and intergenerational equity. And you read this, you're like, what the hell does that even mean? A new social contract? Like, what? These are people who feel like they have the right to redefine the way that we live our lives. And we're cattle, basically. But they don't want you to think that.
Well, and that's kind of my point whenever I say like people have been corralled into cities. Like they moved all the industries into these centralized locations, and people chased after those opportunities. And so they kind of corral. And I remember reading A Brave New World Revisited by Aldous Huxley, where he goes back and he's talking about, it's 20 years later, and he's talking about when, like his vision of a Brave New World and what he thought was going to happen, and then how quickly it was happening right before our eyes, and it was just occurring and nobody was putting a stop to it. And he made a point that I forgot my fucking point now. He was saying that these corporations, these structures are moving at such a vast rate that people are unaware of them. And I'm reminded of, and I've brought it up several times on the podcast, when Brett Weinstein had talked about evolutionary biology in occurrence with technology. And he's talking about how technology is moving so quickly that evolutionarily we can't keep up with it, right? And I kind of feel like the same with the corporate structure, that it's evolving at such a vast rate that the human mind fully grasp the amount of power that they have put into place.
Yeah. So the way I see it is, whether these are people who are, think of themselves as good people that have the right to do this and are just doing something crazy, or whether they know what they're doing in the malicious, it doesn't make a difference. The end result's the same. I agree with you. Now, to me, there is the only thing organic about it is, even if there wasn't some evil plan or whatever, I still think we would be headed in this direction anyway.
Yeah.
Just because, just because I feel like there's this inevitability to humanity wanting to destroy itself just from where technology is going. Because people forget, right? They tend to think, oh, the more tech we have, the more we get to relax and be innovative. It's like, no. We still have a competitive society where you get replaced. Like, you still have to prove your worth to the so-called society. And the future is bright for people that are chosen to be in it. If you are not seen as having any kind of value.
No, I was just going to say, I kind of think of it a lot like I look at the Industrial Revolution, whereas like the slave owners, like the plantation owners, wanted to keep their slaves, and they were kind of being left behind economically. Whereas they're, and I'm kind of like, this is kind of an insult to myself, like, honestly, but I see what is happening with technology, and my focus becomes more and more being hands-on with the earth and growing my own food, doing my own thing, like, because I see how technology is progressing. So my natural instinct is to regress and say, nope, I don't want any of that. I'm going back the other direction. I'm not saying that I have slaves. Like, that's not where I'm going with this. But if the opportunity were to present itself, no, I'm just kidding. That was a bad joke. I should not say things like that.
It's your podcast. You can say whatever you want.
I'm putting it up at the Libertarian Institute. They're gonna like yell at Scott Horton now. But no, the fact of the matter is I find myself like fighting against the technological age in a way that I am more agrarian, and I find myself in more of an agrarian state of mind. And that's kind of the way I live my life. And that was a big determining factor in me taking less money so that I could be home more, is so that I could be more active with the things that we are doing that on a more agrarian lifestyle. So it's interesting that you bring up the evolutionary tract of the technology.
Yeah. So my point is, whether it's malicious or not, the consequences just means it's a bad idea. And Ted Kaczynski basically talked about this in many of his essays. Now, I don't agree with him as to his response, right? Like, I don't believe in a violent response,
Right.
but I do agree with his diagnosis.
Right.
I do agree. And even the World Economic Forum refers to this as the fourth industrial revolution. And they treat this like an inevitability, and that instinct that you feel is totally correct, and I feel that too. And I believe that there even was a back to the land movement. I don't know if that was in the 70s, but I think that nature is the original matrix, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the closest thing to the truth that we have. And then human society is this construction that we've sort of put together in different arrangements. And if I had to sum up this episode, it would be, look, the Amish were right. They're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I'm just too weak of a human being to go do that, although I wish I wasn't. That's basically it. Like, on some level, I think, maybe they've managed to find that magical formula of like having enough technology to have a good life, but then also understanding that sometimes it's important to do things the hard way, because there's these purposes and meaning and fulfillment to it that's part of the human spirit. And I think in that pursuit of doing everything in a convenient way, that gets lost. So don't get me wrong, I like modern medicine. I like my indoor plumbing and my air conditioning. I'm not going to pretend like, if you let me out the back door tomorrow, I would just go start making a greenhouse and knowing what I'm doing. I'm not. But part of the problem is we get so used to these modern comforts, we go, oh shit, we're domesticated house cats. If things hit the fan in a crisis situation, we're useless, and we lose that generational knowledge. That's so important because we tend to, you know, take on our modern society and fit ourselves. So absolutely, he was right, and the Amish are right, and that's the takeaway. But
so the takeaway I'm getting is Ted Kaczynski should have been Amish. That's what I got.
right.
What I was trying to say a while ago that I lost my train of thought on because I got too detailed in the backstory. One of the things in Brave New World Revisited that Aldous Huxley points out is that the tyranny of the future is going to be not oppressive but rewarding, and so they are going to reward those that obey and ignore those that disobey. And so that those that obey are the ones that are actually going after and oppressing those that disobey. Right. And so you see this a lot with the COVID cult where they're being, you know, they get their little cookie and their little pat on the back for being a good little citizen and learning from that Prussian school system just right. And they attack anybody who even asks a question. It could be an honest question. It could be a doctor asking a question. And you'll have the trash man at the end of the street fucking cussing a doctor out, you know? And just because a doctor or a scientist asks a question. And so what he was talking about is that he was actually pointing out, without using the language, that people react to incentives. And that if you incentivize the population to be good little citizens, the majority of to be good little citizens.
Yeah, I mean, look, as much of a snake that Governor Cuomo of New York is, he's very honest. He said it himself. He's like, look, none of this COVID stuff could happen unless people enforced it amongst themselves. He's like, none of these businesses could do anything, you know, or no one could really get in trouble unless we police each other. He was very honest about that. He's like, government can't make you do anything. Yeah. You make you do something.
Right.
And that gives up, you know, the game. It's like, absolutely getting people to police each other. And so ironically, and what I want to get into with this paper is there's going to be a decentralization of government.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've kind of thrown us off the scent completely.
It's cool. Cool.
This is how my brain works. This is why my podcast is so fucking crazy.
Oh, I know. I'm coming. I'm aware. There is going to be a decentralization of government, but not like you and I are never going to get what we want from the system, right? Anytime the system advocates for something that's in alignment with what we want, it's not for good reasons. Like when they say defund the police, it's not because they've had a change of heart and they're like, oh yeah, we should get rid of this terrible perverted enforcement structure. No. It's because the system, you know, that cathedral, if you will, no longer has a use for it, or they have something else in mind. You get rid of police, you're getting AI drones. I mean, there's always some kind of terrible agenda on the back burner for why they do these things. And I believe that the future is going to be a decentralized government, but not in the way we think it is. It's going to be a dissolvement of that bureaucratic facade, and it's going to be replaced with these just large corporations that are essentially the new management, the new government, right? Yeah. And it's going to be even more of we policing each other with a social credit score system and everything like that. So it's like, as anarchists,
have you read that?
Oh,
go ahead. Finish what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask. Oh, okay. We have a delay apparently.
It's okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Like anarchists will be like, yay, the government's dissolved. And then, oh no, it's just transformed itself into something else.
I was just going to ask if you'd read that paper I had talked about that Parag Khanna wrote the devolution, basically delegitimizing. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's delegitimizing empire through devolution. And basically what he's talking about is using decentralization on behalf of the World Economic Forum. That's basically the whole point of it.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
I haven't read that paper, but it sounds similar to what we're talking about right now. And,
well, you
yeah.
came to those conclusions, I guess, on your own, which is something that he's talking about. Okay, yeah, if Brexit wants to Brexit, let them Brexit. And what we will do is we'll spend less money plundering and bribing their local politicians than we will bribing the national politicians. That's basically the whole point of it.
Yeah. Look, there's always going to be management, and that face is going to change, right? Like religion was old management versus government, which is new management, versus corporations, which is new management.
Yeah.
So there's always like a structure to take its place, right? It's just that the veneer of that structure changes on what is politically expedient at the time. And what's politically expedient now is that whole bullshit woke virtue signal culture is like, oh, we're such good people. Like that's, it's like if you were such good people, you wouldn't have to work so hard to convince everyone what good people you really are.
Right. Yeah.
But
well,
yeah.
wouldn't it to go back to the religion part of the management? Wouldn't the evidence be in the fruits?
Well, absolutely. And even now, I mean, government, it took me so long to understand this concept, but government and secularism is a religion. It's just everything is a competing cult and everything is a competing religion.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's the way I see it. It's like that meme where you've got the astronaut looking at Earth. He's like, wait, it's all competing cults? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Waco was one cult killing another cult. That was it. That's all way. And I'm friends with David Thibodeau. I don't mean that in any disrespect. I'm just saying it was one religion destroying another religion.
And freedom is you deciding which cult you want to be a part of, or maybe none. Although it's very difficult to avoid all cults completely.
Well, I mean,
there's creepy things
that come
within
back
this
to
paper.
Doesn't they come back to Dunbar's law?
What's that law? I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so Dunbar's law said that the ultimate lifestyle, basically what he's describing is how tribes interact with each other, right? Or within themselves.
Hmm.
And he's saying that most people can't have meaningful relationships beyond a certain number. Now that number has been, it was a range and then it's been manipulated here and there, but it's somewhere between 150 and 520 that
Yeah.
he determined that people cannot live harmoniously beyond this point. So when you look at Dunbar's law, you're basically, what you're looking at are small tribes, right? And
Yeah.
and whenever I look at the United States, I'm the first one to say North Dakota doesn't need the same laws as fucking Texas. And
Yeah.
Houston, Texas definitely doesn't need the same laws as where I'm living here in the out in the fucking country. Different places, completely different environments, completely different people. It's completely different atmosphere. So I look at Dunbar's law, and not in so much as he was absolutely correct, but he was on to something as far as there is a limited amount of space within your mind to function socially with people. And that is the amount of people that you can, you know, function with on a day-to-day basis. And so I I look at what's happening around us and I'm like, I've been saying since 2005, like
Hmm.
secession is inevitable. Like this will never work. Like this is going to keep breaking down and breaking down and breaking down until everybody just goes their own way and does their own thing on a community level.
Yeah, I can give you a even better example too to break that down. Like New York State is pretty big, and not every part of New York is the same. You
Mhm.
know, New York City is not the same as Buffalo, where I'm from, which is not the same as Long Island. Like you have pretty, red areas of New York, but it's all everyone just thinks of it like New York City, for instance. And I agree with you that people are not generally uh we're not evolved to deal with this much technology, this much exposure to this many people in a global economy. It's overwhelming. And that whole like we're all in this together, blah blah blah. Like this World Economic Forum wants to convince you we're all one big family. Well, we're can I swear?
Yes,
Can I swear
please.
on your podcast?
If you
Well, we're all
don't, I
fucking
will
not.
be offended. You better
You're like
swear.
it's my culture. It's how giving each other a hard time is both a way of showing animosity and love. But yeah, it's like we're they're trying to force the idea that we're all one big global family, and we're fucking not. Like here's the problem too is I look at this from an evolutionary psychology perspective. Look, it's like in general with tribes and stuff, people are more likely, there's a hierarchy of loyalty. Okay, I'm just laying it out. It's not this black and white. I got friends that I don't share genes with that I absolutely love and consider family, but basically people are more likely to invest effort into people they share genetics with, right?
Right.
Like there's this um there's this prioritization of you want to help people that share genes with you survive because that's your legacy and so forth. And then you are less likely to feel that towards people you're not related to. And this whole like world economic system is they want everyone to somehow feel that level of connection with each other, but in a forced way, right? Like I loved Childerberg. I loved that connection and we had a lot of values in common with each other. And it didn't matter to me that we weren't like born in the same place or whatever. But it's just kind of like a perverted version of forcing everyone to get along when, yeah, I agree with you. Like there needs to be a national divorce. Like screw it. This is not sustainable, as that word likes to get thrown around. It's just you can't force everyone to look at each other like family just because they live in the same area. Like it's not going to work.
Well, what happens when a husband and wife are stuck in a
Mm,
marriage together and things go horribly wrong and they want to split up, but they're incapable of splitting up for one reason or the other. It turns violent.
Mm-hmm.
Now just put that on a scale of 320 million people.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get violent if this continues.
And it's more than just not getting along. It's to the point of just mockery and clear antagonization.
Well, just this is hate. Like, this is true hate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
there
absolutely.
are a
I
lot
agree
of
with you.
people in this country who have opinions that make me hate them. I despise some of these people. You know? They want to put me up against a wall as bad as I want to put them up against a wall. I mean, honestly, I'm
And
because I know that if you had the chance to put me up against a wall, you would. I would try to do it first because I know you want me dead. You absolutely despise me for who I am. And so out of self-defense, just out of self-preservation, I feel like, oh, okay, there are some of these people that if they stepped on my property, I wouldn't ask a question. I wouldn't tell them that trespassers weren't allowed. I would just start shooting because no, you're not the type of people I want anything to do with, you know? And they are most of these people are backing this act on part of corporations. They are on the same side as these corporations that we're talking about in the World Economic Forum.
yeah, they hate us and they mock us. I mean, that's the whole, aside from any so-called scientific purpose of mass, I see it as an occult mockery ritual, basically. And when you've got Biden talking about ice cream and blah blah blah, I mean, that's a reference to pedophilia. I mean, they're just throwing it in our fucking faces, whether we understand the symbology or not. They don't care. And anytime the system supports progressive issues, it's not because they care about individual expression, right? It's like they kind of reference libertarianism in a sense when it serves them, and property rights and ethics and everything when it serves them, and then they throw it out when it doesn't. Like, let me give you an example. The thing gluing together COVID policy is perverted ethics arguments, right? They're saying we don't care about overdoses, we don't care about all the hospital deaths that occurred from people who couldn't get proper treatment for other things. We care about the idea that people can't consent to getting sick. It's like, and it's this messed up, perverted way of looking at it, because people can consent to risk.
Right.
But even if there's more deaths from suicides, they don't care because they don't see suicide as contagious.
Well, you can consent to interacting in public. How about those? How about those that are terrified? Stay the fuck home and let the rest of us get on with our lives.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping those people. Have no problem putting other people at risk to get them food and the things that they need, but somehow they just forget that. They don't have a problem with delivery services if it puts somebody else at risk.
Right.
That's just, well, so absolutely. And I think the way that the system works, more or less, in how you described in that Brave New World, is they give you the rope to hang yourself, and they want you to do it so that they're not karmically culpable, whether that's how that works or not. I mean, a lot of people talk about, revelation of the method, where it's like they have to show you, I don't know whether this is true or not, but it's an interesting idea where it's like they have to show you what they want to do to you and try to get you to do it to yourself and comply so that they're not responsible. And in a sense, like I've mentioned before, Governor Cuomo saying, if politicians didn't have anyone enforcing this and didn't try to get these Karens and people to police things, it would just fall apart. The whole system would fall apart and everyone could go home, So it's like getting people to do it to themselves. And if you can convince people that it's the right thing to do, it's even worse, right? It's that incrementalism. It's like a perverted game of Simon Says, where something will start off making a little bit of sense, and then over time becomes more and more crazy, just to see. It's like conditioning people for communism, just to basically see if they'll still go along with it. It's like, and I think the reason that lockdowns were so long was just for behavior modification purposes. If you just, you really, it's a domestic abuse situation. You isolate people, you cut them off from friends and family, you know, tell them what garbage they are and that they're selfish for wanting to live their lives, like, and you just hammer that into their head, that fear 24/7 after months and months and months, that's going to break down people. And it's terrible because with this World Economic Forum, for instance, like, they know that role in technology, and they say funny things like this. On page 17, they say, we estimate that by 2025, some 97 million new jobs will emerge globally. And you're like, yay! And you read a little further, while 85 million will be displaced due to the new division of labor between humans and machines. You're like, what? What? Yeah, and then they say the collaboration of governments, companies, and civil society in regional and sectoral clusters will be necessary to identify and support opportunities for job creation and employment protection. And they basically get into things like UBI and how we need to train people for future jobs. And you can tell it's all manipulative. It's all about social engineering the demand. And it gets really crazy because they have this wild chart that they use to explain the old versus new paradigms that I'm just going to find for you. And they give examples of things in other countries. And what I hate so much is maybe it drives you crazy too. They're always like, the pandemic did this, the pandemic did that. No, you did that. You know, your COVID policies did that, not a fucking virus. There's worse things than COVID, right? I don't like to say what COVID is or isn't because it's like making a claim. It doesn't matter to me, because there's worse shit out there than COVID. There's like tuberculosis and bacterial pneumonia and crazy things. You know, and there's tons of people who died of cancer and diabetes and other things because they couldn't get treatment. But like I said, they don't care about that. But let me just find this wonderful chart that they have about, you know, the way that they want to frame the way that people see things.
All right. Well, while you're finding that, let me add on to what you were saying real quick, because one of the things that stuck out to me was in shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution. One of the things they're talking about is, and he says it in the plainest language possible, we do not only have to shape and develop the future technologies, we also have to shape and develop the minds of children. Talking about like injecting themselves into education. And so this is openly what they are talking about. Like, you are not projecting some idea upon these people.
Yeah, it's really terrible. I think there's some journalist who said this was great, and awful, but he goes, it's not rocket science. They just want to diddle your kids. Absolutely. We have a structure run by pedos, and they're making a world for them. It's basically, if I had to look at things from a cynical, messed up perspective, it would be, hey, Earth is kind of a pedo farm right now. Doesn't have to be, but the way that they're saying it's cool to give kids hormone replacement therapy, and it's totally fine to inject them with an experimental quote unquote COVID vaccination. And I mean, it drives me crazy because they still, like in New York, they still want to mask kids. And even Fauci's talking about it. And there's no scientific basis for doing that. Like, even according to them, I feel so bad for what these adults are doing. These adults that are charged with the responsibility of helping these little humans grow. I mean, it's so evil. It's so black and white evil to me. But I found this chart that says on page 48, there's an overall shift in narrative and approach to economic policy and business strategy. And it shows this figure, this little box that they made, and it says old paradigm, small government, business facilitation, everything has a price, yearly results, businesses know best and consumers know best. And their new pathway, this is what they want to push, dynamic public sector, that means more government, symbiotic public
Oh, shit.
partner.
You broke up.
What that means, that basically government sort of being replaced with, can you hear me now?
Yes. Say what you just said again.
No problem. The new pathway.
Symbiotic is where I lost you.
Symbiotic public-private partnerships. That means, like I mentioned, that shift towards more of a corporate structure to government. Right now, to me personally, I think there's no such thing as public. I think everything is private and that government's fraud. I think that whole concept of public is just a spook. But anyway, they're basically saying we want to have more partnerships with corporations, and that's what I talked about, that dissolving of the bureaucratic. They say rethinking value, patient finance, the hell is that? Production scale up, and nudging and shaping demand. That one gets to me because they say the old paradigm is customers know best, right? You and I having that purchasing power and that influence, to nudging and shaping demand. If you're familiar with the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays, and he talks about, you know, influencing and trying to get people to value certain things, and absolutely, they're just being open about it. They're being open about how they want this new way of looking at things. They want people to just basically be told what to value,
right,
and what to care about.
Yeah.
Really awful.
And they want to bring it into every aspect of your life. It's not, there are no limits to where they feel like they should have the influence over you.
Yeah. And then there's a couple more segments here. And the reason I'm reading these quotes from the paper is because I think they're just really, it's just rich in its own in what they're saying, black and white. They say, page 48, in most countries, the debate about the role of government in the economy remains focused on how big it should be rather than how bold. There needs to be a change in the approach where public officers are encouraged to experiment and take risks. There needs to be a new narrative on the role of the public sector, away from that of a burdensome bureaucracy to one of market co-creator. This will in turn make public employment more attractive to the right type of talent. Only the combined efforts of the public and private sectors will be able to transform techno-economic paradigms and bring better and broader growth. So to kind of break that down, they're basically explaining to you their plan. They want to rebrand government away from what it really is, which is a paperwork mafia backed by violence, where everyone like knows more or less that it's this different entity, that it has a lot of power. And they wanted to rebrand it as this market co-creator, as somehow this like hip and cool. It reminds me of the whole Silicon Valley thing, where like billionaires no longer just get to be like these, you know, fat cats with cigars. They got to be like you and me, you know, they got to, I don't know, wear jeans and do ayahuasca, and somehow that makes them special and that makes them connected to us. It's like, no, you're all fucking nuts. You all think you have the right. Yeah.
I was just going to say, that reminds me of this spoof page I ran into on Facebook one time, and it was called Anarcho-Fascism. And their tagline was, the market has spoken. People want government, so let's make it our government. You know? and they were calling themselves anarcho-fascists. It was a joke, obviously, but it's kind of like what they're saying. And I remember reading several times, not just once or twice, several different places, Klaus Schwab made the statement that this is the era of big government. Mm-hmm. And that's their entire goal, is to make government bigger and more prominent in your life.
Yeah, and then we're kind of seeing this, you know, with the federal government coming out and talking about how they're going to censor things on Facebook. I mean, that might not be new information to you and I, but they're just being overt about it. And there's an interesting thing where they talk about basically social media. Page 50, they say, finally, the development of some digital technologies and business models has contributed to polarization, misinformation, and an increase in depression, anxiety, and other mental disorders, potentially tearing apart our communities. That's wild. Like, they know that what these technologies, these digital technologies can do. And look, I'm not here to say all technology is bad, or that all digital technology is bad, or that even digital nomadism is inherently bad. I just think that a lot of libertarians and anarchists don't understand the fallout. They don't understand the consequences of where these things are headed, and that we're not in charge of it. There is, like, they know that there's no free market, but it's more complicated than that, right? It's kind of like, I understand the criticism of saying that libertarians and anarchists worship the free market and how human desire shouldn't be at the helm of everything. So some of the blame is, yeah, on these evil corporations, these evil people, but some of the blame is kind of on us and having, you know, at least for myself, like having that blind spot and that failure to recognize that, like, how we contribute to this, that, you know, even if we didn't have a government and we just said, yeah, human desire 100% gets to run the market, you would still have a lot of evil and terrible things, right? Like, it's important for us to kind of, it's hard to do, but, and yeah.
I think what you're asking is, are we the 21st century useful idiots that Lenin talked about?
Yeah, and probably.
I mean, seriously, are we acting in such a way that benefits those that wish to control us?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard not to, right? Like, I use Twitter and I use social media, and I'm aware, I'm at least like consciously aware that this is a product that is designed to take my personal data and information. It's designed to contribute towards getting people
Your
to fight,
oppression,
giving you a limited amount of, yeah. So it's like, I'm trying to reverse that. I'm trying to use the technologies for good, for my own benefit, and it's very hard because it's not designed for our benefit.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. And so
it's hard to do.
So one must ask themselves, what if in fact, I heard I've been binging on You're Talking Over Me with Adam Patrick.
Good podcast.
I'll be interviewing him on Sunday. So, and I kept telling him, I'm going to listen to your podcast. I'm going to listen to your podcast. I swear I'm going to listen to your podcast. And I finally, because I booked an interview with him, I've been binging on it so I could have a basis of conversation with him. And he's a nice guy. I've talked to him on Twitter. I've had conversations with him. He's a really nice guy. And he had a guy on who was talking about the cycles. Now, this was brought up to me. I'd heard it, but I hadn't really looked at it until the other day, where I had Coop and Matt Erickson and Ace on, and it came up in the conversation.
Yeah, I'm still listening to that. Very good.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I thought it was, I kind of felt like I was getting a private live stream at times. I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is one of the, like, this conversation is better than I thought it was going to go. Like, I thought matching these guys up, just by knowing who all of them are, I was like, oh, this is going to be these guys will have a great conversation. And when I got them on together, I was like, oh, this is so much better than I thought it was going to be. But
yeah, it's because we might have different ways about, or we might disagree about the way in which we want to achieve things. But I think there's a lot of overlap in value of what the kind of world that we want to see.
Exactly. And that's kind of one of the things I've noticed is, no matter, and I'm kind of going off beaten path here. I'll get back to what I was saying in just a second. But one of the things I've noticed is that everybody, like, all right, take the Dave Smith, Vin Armani, and Matt Erickson, like, beef that's happening, right? That everybody's so focused on. You know what the one thing all these guys have in common is they have very young children, and they are trying to protect their very young children, and they're trying to figure out how to make the best world for their very young children. They're not really against each other. Like, they just have different tactics as to how to achieve what they want for their very young children. That's it. And so I kind of get frustrated with the whole libertarian infighting, which is why you don't see me interact with it very much, because I'm just kind of like, you people are all a bunch of idiots. But so the cycles came up, and the fourth turning came up, and Adam Patrick had a guy on, I can't remember the guy's name for the life of me, who was talking about archetypes and in cyclical history, and he said that we are now entering the cycle of the peasant, or the archetype of the peasant in the modern cycle. And I was like, maybe that's this drive I've had within me to work on the earth and to become part of like my entire process and my entire life is this whole cyclical drive. And it's something organic and metaphysical that I can't actually like identify. And so I'm just trying to tell people, you got to get away from what you're used to and take responsibility for yourself. And by doing so, you have to be connected to where your food comes from, what you're doing, where your life is going. And so I thought that was a very intriguing point. And how else are you going to fight those that wish to control what foods you eat? I mean, we know that Bill Gates just bought 242,000 acres of farmland. You know, they're trying to control what chemicals you put in your body, you know, how you live your life, you know, and all these different aspects of life. And it's just like, if you want complete control over your life, you have to kind of take the bull by the horns and say, okay, I'm going to steer you the way I want to steer you.
Yeah, if you don't mind me unpacking this, for me personally, whenever I make a point or a claim, I like to have my notes. I like to, you know, and I like to try to think rationally and logically and whatever, and not just rely on my so-called intuition and my instincts and my emotions, because I know that those things aren't 100% pure. Those things can absolutely be influenced. But I do agree with you. I feel this immense instinct to just like make a U-turn, like complete U-turn, and be like, just in my brain, I'm like, future is bad. Like everything of where they're pushing us, you know, it's just not for your benefit. And the gaslighting is through the roof on everything. Everyone and their mom wants to tell you that don't worry, the government, these corporations, they're socially responsible. They're looking out for your best interest. All these experts want to take care of you. Like, there's this even creepy in this World Economic Forum. They talk about how they want to shift the trust. You know, they want to get people accustomed to stop relying on themselves and their own capacity to do research, and rely more and more on government and corporations to think on their behalf, and to really, like, it's so creepy and wild. And they talk about this too, where and I agree with you, there's somehow something much more tangible and pure, if you will, about making your own food. And there's a practicality to that as well. I mean, I like to say it like this, and I don't mean to be black-pilled in a sense. The entire environment is hostile, and it wants to kill you. You are either tax cattle or your competition, and you are to be taken out if you are a problem.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because when I talk about, I genuinely believe there is a depopulation agenda. I mean, even if you look at the Georgia Guidestones, or, you know, out of context, right? But Bill Gates saying, hey, if we do a good job on the population and we reduce it, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just like, look, you know, you're basically cattle to these people. They don't care about you and your family and the things that they don't care about your autonomy. And I think I like that you're listening to these conversations about historical cycles and things like that. I think it's important, because I think it's easy for, you know, at least me as an anarchist, to be like arrogant and to say, you know what, fuck all the philosophers. I have figured everything out in the year 2021. Rachel D. Tobias, you know, Socrates and Aristotle have just created the path that I can finish. And I have all the answers, and I have clearly figured this whole thing out. And I have determined that it's like we're more of a product than our environment than I would like to care to admit. You know, I want to think I'm so smart, but I would have been a different person in the 1950s, or I would have been a different, like, I hate that so much, but it's really true. I think of everything like the Truman Show, except it's not like a 1950s utopia. It's like a creepy, weird outdoor prison. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And again, I'm not here to black pill. I'm here to just say we need to understand what we're up against in order to do anything about it. So that instinct that tells you to go back to nature and make your own food, it's absolutely correct. Like, that's, you know, and I hate talking about instinct, but that one is for sure. It makes a lot of sense, because we've reached the point where everything is so fake, it just can't sustain itself. Everything is a Ponzi scheme. Everything, the whole fiat currency system, the food is just junk. Like, everything, that industrialization, hey, look, some things are good, right? Like, more people can eat, right? I'm not going to deny that, versus an strictly agrarian society. But at the same time, it's just, there are these fallouts we can't ignore, right? This is stuff Ted Kaczynski talks about. And this is interesting. This gets creepy. Where the World Economic Forum, page 60, said, the human brain is powerful, but it is subject to many forms of systematic error in judgment or cognitive biases when processing information, some errors that are particularly problematic when confronting uncertainty. Most individuals do not regularly observe the world around them, which makes it hard to notice subtle signs that signal shifts. Similarly, the more obscure a risk, or the more distant someone is from a situation, the harder it is to pay attention to it. And what you were saying with historical cycles, I think part of the game is that we have these different generations, just like election cycles, where by the time some people figure things out, they get ignored by the younger generations. Like, oh, you're old, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the same game book played by the elite over and over and over again. And what I mean by that arrogance is it behooves a lot of anarchists and libertarians to do that research, to listen to people they don't agree with, to get into the weird esoteric occult stuff. Like you said, the historical cycles. And, you know, there are some like shifts that are more powerful than us. And we need to acknowledge that. And I'm not saying that, oh, we're just, you know, riding a wave and there's nothing we can do about it. I think it's worth researching. Like, I love Greg Carlwood of the Higher Side Chats. I think it's useful to listen to weird stuff you don't agree with, just because it gives a broader understanding of what's going on and a broader explanation of that.
Yeah, because these people are probably looking at something that you're not looking at.
Yeah.
You know,
like I have to say,
I heard Pete said the other day, and I'm sure you are like me and you love Pete Quinones as much as I do. And I know him personally, and I love Pete to death. And he said, how can you have commentary on modern culture, on Western culture, if you've never read the fucking Bible? And I was like, that actually makes some fucking sense.
Okay. I've cracked the code on this, thanks to Vin Armani and King Pilled. It goes something like this, right? It goes, libertarianism is Christianity for everybody, and Christianity is Judaism for everybody, and Judaism is a conspiracy. Figured it out. Yeah, I will say this, like, I'm not a big fan of organized religion in general, just because I've had my own personal bad experiences and being really raised super religious Jewish, where I felt like that was oppressive to me. I didn't get to have a voice. I didn't get to be an individual. I didn't get to express myself or have any input at all. And no one gave me a good explanation for why I should be Jewish or why I should follow these rituals. Everyone was just like, well, this was something that you have to do in the Holocaust. Like, they just give you guilt and they give you shame, and no fundamental reasoning or explanation for this being a survival thing or why this is so important, right? And that kind of drove me nuts. And so, like, I come at things from a critical, independent thinking perspective. I want to know, well, why are we doing these things? What does it mean, and what does it lead to? And what has been driving me nuts recently is, as much as I don't like organized religion, I have to admit, I understand the questions that it answers that libertarianism alone doesn't. that anarchy alone doesn't. I understand what King Pilled and, Matt, what everyone is saying is you have to have a why. You have to have a reason and a unifying, it's like not quite a unifying philosophy, but a moral vision of how you want the world, but also
because you're
yeah.
fighting a religion. And how
Yeah.
are you going to fight a faith without faith?
Yeah, and it's kind of like what drives me nuts is I know instinctually that if we try to create freedom without referencing religion at all, it's like literally trying to reinvent the wheel.
So
That's what it feels like.
And this is something I want to talk to Adam Patrick about, because he's been one of the guys that's talking religion. And all right, I consider myself an agnostic. I've read the Bible several times. I'm pretty familiar with the stories out of it. It's been probably a decade, so I could probably read it again and get something else out of it. Especially seeing modern times and being like, oh, okay, yeah, you know what I'm saying. But all right, so one of the things I want to talk to him about is when you're looking at this, when you're looking at religion, because I think Adam Patrick is kind of agnostic as well. And so one of the things I've always looked at is, are these stories that we're reading, not necessarily the historical part, because I understand the history, I understand that there is history involved in the Bible, but are we looking at symbols where people were trying to teach us like something and they didn't know how to express this story, and so they're trying to do it in a way that is easier to digest by people, and so they're putting personal like personifying, a deity. One of the things that Coop said on that podcast I did with Matt Erickson and Ace was, God is reality. And I was like, oh shit. So if you're interacting with reality, you're interacting with God. You're not, he wasn't saying God is real. He's saying reality in itself is what God is, and that you cannot defy the laws of reality, that these laws exist, and you are always going to have circumstances for your actions when you are trying to defy reality. And understanding that what we are up against is a religion, I'm like, even if you just live as if there is a God, not saying you actually believe, you just live as if there is a God, are you putting yourself on better footing than everybody else? Because I've always kind of considered nature my spirituality. I love being out in nature. I love working in the garden. I love fishing. I'll go sit outside in silence for hours. I love that. And I always have. So that's kind of always been my God. But is that a true representation of what is being talked about whenever somebody says God?
So the way I approach something like this is I like to take different premises, almost like different lenses or hats, and look at a problem and try it on and then see if something makes sense or not. Right? That's what I like to do. And I understand to a certain extent, just because something doesn't make sense doesn't mean it's untrue, or just because it does doesn't mean it's true, blah, blah, blah. But that's what I do is I get outside my arrogance, right? I'm agnostic, but I'll take like a Christian viewpoint and I'll put it on and I'll look at a problem and see, does it make sense? And oftentimes it does. So I agree with you where the way I've broken this down is whether a God exists or not, there's rules to this realm, right? I like to call it a realm, but there's rules to this realm. We can try to bend those rules. We can try to break them, but if we break them, there's consequences for our actions. And some people, the cost is worth it. Let me give you a good example, like the left and their ideology, right? They say that men can be pregnant people and blah, blah, blah. They want to break the rules, right? I personally, I wish I could wave my hand and make everyone whatever gender they want to be, and I want everyone to be happy and blah, blah, blah. But I know there's rules to this reality. Unfortunately, it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Whether it comes from God, whether it comes from nature. And I understand what he means by God is the truth, because there's this unbreakable, objective reality that doesn't care about your philosophy and your feelings.
Right.
It sucks. Like, right? I feel like that snake in the garden where I feel like a lawyer. I'm like, well, maybe God shouldn't have lied and blah. Like, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you feel, And so the left thinks that they can be gods. They can do what they want and they can overwrite reality. You can break the rules as long as you're cool with the cost of that. Now, I think a lot of the way the system works is it lies to people about the cost of that. And it tells people there is no cost. You can just go break the rules if you want.
Right.
You can make your own. And it's just not true. There is absolutely a fallout and a cost. And we're seeing the fallout right now of having a society where the values that are fake, that consumerism, that materialism, it can't replace wanting to be connected to a God or nature or whatever. It's like the system just works to try to separate you from yourself and from you understanding your connection to the world, your impact on it. And basically everyone is the captain of their own consciousness, their ship. The way that I see it is you have the right to the direction of your own spiritual evolution, right? Whatever this realm is, whatever reality is or isn't, you have the right to your own consciousness. And the system believes that you don't. I'm not saying, again, we can be influenced. I'm not saying we're totally isolated beings with no sort of, total 100% control over our own monkey mind thoughts. I am saying that the system believes that they have the right to steer your consciousness and to control your spiritual evolution or de-evolution. And to get back to your point with the religion, to me, whether it's Christianity, whatever it is, there's rules to this realm. There's a cost to that. There's a cost for breaking that. And I believe we're lied to about that formula.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
Well, I remember there was a quote, and I always used to struggle with this quote, and I think it was James Madison that said it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of a people without virtue cannot have liberty. Something along those lines, like liberty belongs to those that are virtuous or something like that. But he was basically saying that you must be grounded in virtue of some sort in order to be a free people. And you look around and it's almost like, okay, maybe I could consider myself somewhat virtuous in some way, shape, or form, but not even in completion. So do I even deserve the freedom that I desire? You know?
And this is another concession I have to make to religion, because this drives me nuts. Like, I do sincerely believe you can be moral without religion.
Right.
That you can ascertain good without saying my rights come from God or whatever. Like, I believe you can come to the same conclusions, even if the math is different, right? Whether it's someone that believes in God or not. I do generally believe that. But the
as long as you show your work.
as long as it's Common Core. What drives me absolutely nuts, and I have to concede this, I always had this failure to understand. I always thought that religion was the antithesis to freedom, because I'm like, well, isn't religion controlling and oppressive, and doesn't it tell you what to do? And isn't that the antithesis of your autonomy? And isn't that in opposition to like you being free and doing what you want as long as you don't hurt people? And it took me a very long time to understand that is incomplete. It's not quite correct, because religion can be controlling and try to tell you what to do in every aspect of your life, which is why I had such a problem with it. What I didn't understand was that notion of do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else is incomplete. Yeah. And I'm not saying, the state should force you to do that, blah, blah, blah. But it's more of you can really hurt yourself if you don't pay attention to the consequences of what you're doing.
You're printing your actions onto the world, right?
Yeah.
And the world is reacting to your actions, whether you know it or not. So when you're printing your actions onto the world and the world is reacting to your actions, then you have a ripple effect. And so you have to take in consideration, what is that ripple and where does that ripple lead? You know, whether like you may have been the first generation of parent to get a divorce, but now the divorce rate is astronomical. And what is that doing to children? Right? And so you have to look at these things not at the micro or the anecdote, but you have to look at it at the macro. And what example am I setting for the next generation who might be trying to follow my footsteps? And what does that lead to? What are the repercussions if I set an example that others are willing to follow? What is the repercussion of that example that I am setting? And how bad could it get? And in some cases, like divorce, it can get really bad.
Yeah, that taking self-responsibility and accountability is the other half of that freedom. And that's something that I didn't realize. And I wasn't like, oh yeah, we should have a blank check to just hurt other people. But what I didn't realize was what you do still has impact. And I believe when it comes to progressivism and, you know, all these authoritarianism, it's like they understand that notion, but they pervert it, right? Like COVID tyranny, for instance, they say what you do affects other people. And that's absolutely true. But they take it to a crazy place that's really, you know, inverted and not helpful. But with religion, the way I see it is whether you believe in a God or not, it can give you these guide stones of how to live your life. And a lot of those guide stones understand human nature more than I wanted to give it credit for. It's almost like old time psychology. They understand how people work, and people work on this weird mesh of, we're not all hyper rational beings as much as we'd like to think so.
Most of us aren't.
Whoops.
I would actually say like 99.9% of us aren't, no matter how much we convince ourselves we are.
Right. We're good.
How many times have you been like, you're like in your libertarian mind and then you stop yourself and you're like, oh, I'm acting emotionally, I shouldn't do that, you know?
There are many times I so-called like trip over my own dick and I'm like, oh, I can't blame the state. I can't blame this. It's like getting to a place where I finally have the right information is so hard. And then it's like, once I have the right information, I have to take the right actions. And that's basically, I like to also say God is causality, cause and effect.
Okay.
Because you can't escape causality. It's a constant, whatever. And I'm like, man, it's, and I've joked about this when people say, for instance, oh, people just need to hear the message of liberty, and that's all it takes to just fix things.
People just need to hear the message of God, and that's all it takes to fix things.
Right. But I joke about two things. I say, so that's like telling everyone, hey, if everyone just knew about working out and eating healthy, we'd all be in shape, right? That's the only thing stopping. And then if everyone was just Christian, everything would be fine. Well, do not underestimate the human capacity to like do things and justify it after the fact and twist things and kind of like, yeah, you have Christians, but then you have different denominations of Christians that interpret things differently and don't all agree with each other. So even if I snap my fingers and I said, we're all libertarians now, we wouldn't agree on the NAP. We wouldn't agree on what is or isn't a threat. We wouldn't agree on what is or isn't a violation. Like you, and I joke, I'm like, oh, so in the absence of the state, libertarians don't have drama, right? Right? Like you still, because there's still, we need to understand like human nature and behavior in order to do anything about it. And I think they forget. We think we're these hyper rational beings that only follow Austrian economics and never deviate. We don't do anything without reason and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's just a good self-check and an ego check that's super important to say, like, you know what, we're these wild creatures that operate on a lot of emotion and storytelling and symbology. And religion just understands that, because religion understands that need to be a part of something bigger than yourself, connected to other people, moving towards this really intense goal. And I think like I understand why there would still be so much conflict if you had just like a group of people that didn't share the same values and didn't have the same vision of the world that they wanted. And I understand how religion can create cohesion, right? And I'm not saying force everyone to do the same thing, but it sucks because, again, when I try to avoid religion wholesale, it really does feel like reinventing the wheel. When I'm trying to think of a way to structure society that doesn't violate people's rights, but yet lacks a story, it lacks a vision, it lacks a purpose, it just falls apart.
It feels like to me, and I could be reading this wrong, and maybe my libertarianism is wrong, but the World Economic Forum has a utopia myth. Leftism, socialism, communism has a utopian myth. The right, the Republicans, the right, conservatives, they have a utopian myth. Libertarians have no utopian myth. Libertarians only have liberty. And that's, there's no utopia in liberty because liberty is dangerous.
But liberty is, here's the thing that's so incomplete. Liberty is a means to an end. It's not the final destination. I joke that like libertarianism is when you're trying to get to freedom, and you're trying to get to anarchy, and Ron Paul never picked you up at the train station. He promised he would, right? It's an incomplete philosophy because you want freedom, but freedom to do what? And we all have a different what.
I've always looked at libertarianism as freedom from, not freedom to.
Right.
It's not positive, it's negative.
Right.
That's the
and
thing.
I agree.
And utopia is a positive promise. Libertarianism is a negative promise.
It's a defense. And you can't live your life just on the defense. It's important to have a defense, but what is the offense, right? Like what is the bigger,
what is the goal
picture?
Where do you end up? And every libertarian will tell you straight up, it's not perfect, it's not utopia, it's dangerous. That's what libertarians will tell you. Well, nobody wants that. Everybody wants the utopia. Everybody's looking to replace heaven.
Right. And you can have Eden on earth. When you talk about being in nature, I believe that that's recreating Eden on earth, so to speak. I believe in that. And I don't think that this world has to be, I would love more than anything to create Eden on earth, just to shove it up the ass of these people at the World Economic Forum, just to say, fuck you, fuck your realm. You try to make this place a prison and we turned it around. I would love for there to be like a libertarian. Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking, like, think about it. You're a mother, you have 3 children, you work a full-time job, you have a husband, you have to clean the house, you have to make sure the kids go to school. You have all these responsibilities. And somebody comes up to you and says, I have this great ideology and it's going to offer you more problems. You're going to be like, go fuck yourself. I don't want it.
Yeah, I got a lot of shit for this, but I said libertarianism is just feminism for autistic men. And people were like, what? I'm like, think about it, because this system there's a difference between freedom and liberation. And that's something that it took me a long time to realize too. Liberation is this falsehood where we've seen that with gender dynamics, with relationships, what you just described. The system comes along and promises, just like the feminists, to women, like, hey, we're going to free you from your shackles. We're going to free you from your responsibilities, your role, your social obligations, blah, blah, blah. And some of that has legitimacy to it where, people, may not always fit a certain role, and there needs to be a little bit more customization with that and autonomy. But more or less, anyone that promises you liberation from yourself or liberation from some human aspect of yourself is just selling you more slavery. And it took me so long to understand that conceptually.
Right.
And with religion too, I mean, I agree with you, Pete. There needs to be something that people define themselves other than being on the defense. Absolutely. And to me, the state is simply a representation of the worst aspect of ourselves. And I'm not saying it's you and I running the World Economic Forum, blah, blah, blah. But when you say you hate the state and you hate politicians, what you're really hating is people making bad choices, people choosing to do the wrong thing with their time on Earth.
And that's what
we're fighting.
And that's what people do. But
and,
hey, I think we've come to a good conclusion here. What do you have to like wrap up the world economic fascism with? And
what
then
do I have
plugs.
to wrap up? Yeah, of course. I suggest that people do read the white papers from the World Economic Forum, like I said, just to grasp what it is that they're up to. When I listen to the news, it's not because I believe in it. It's because I want to know how they're going about doing the plans that they do. I'm not here to sell black pills. I just think that people should understand how these crazy people want to shape the future so that we can go around it. And I think that anarchists need to have a bigger ego check. And I think that religion is not always the ego check by the way that it's meant to be, because people can override that, right? Because religion has a true criticism of people and go, you know what, you will deify things, you'll be your own God, blah, 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 if you don't follow this other thing. Okay. But don't underestimate the capacity for people to take that religion and twist it to their own personal ends or still deify themselves. Look, we're all, we do the best we can. I think that the solution to the World Economic Forum is hyper-localization. I think it's connecting with each other, understanding the traps, and there's so many of them. There's just such a small path to freedom and truth, and everything around it is like a timeshare. It's just an absolute trap to, disconnect you from yourself. I think connecting with each other, putting aside our egos, putting ourselves in other shoes and listening to people we don't agree with. I've listened to more religious people, more monarchists and whatever. I don't necessarily always agree with them, but I take their critiques to heart and I use it to better myself.
All right.
And at the very least, that's important to do. Go to liberty festivals, look at land, like you said, return to the earth, think generationally, think long-term, the kind of world that, you want your children to see. And if we understand the ways in which they're trying to attack us, it reminds us of what is important real fast. Like, it's terrible what they're doing with the COVID tyrannies, especially in New York, right? The vaccine, we have a vaccine passport. They're punishing people by taking away entertainment and all these things and disconnecting from society. But there's a silver lining to that. The silver lining is if the system takes away the distractions, you are left with what is important. And you're left with the opportunity to reevaluate your life and to just kind of go, fuck you, I'm going to pursue something different.
Absolutely. Plug away, Miss Co-host of a radio show.
Yeah, I do Saturdays RBN Network. I co-host the Freedom Ministry, and that is from 2 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. That's real time. I don't know what anything else is. And then real adult time. I also have Rachel D. Tobias is my Twitter handle. I don't want to have Twitter forever because I'm aware of what a trap, I'm aware it adds to that prison, but like I'm trying to use it for my own benefit and to meet people and kind of like eventually get off of it. Right. So that's where people can reach me. And there is hope. I think this is we have an opportunity for a great reset in our favor. We have a good opportunity to reevaluate what we care about and redirect ourselves, regardless of what these crazy people want to do.
We can be the savages in a brave new world.
Yeah, I think that's what it's really going to come down to, honestly. And, and just, again, don't be like me, where I was a doofus and just wholesale rejected every aspect of religion and said, I'm above this and blah. Like, I guess, look at things from that lens, but also understand those historical cycles and that this is bigger than us.
Right.
But use that to humble yourself.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop the recording and I will tell you bye on the other side.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much for having me.
just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you waved just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Cause this world it needs a cleansing to burn away the shame and destroy all the remnants of those who are to blame. And we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.